When I look at, climate conferences like New York Climate Week, I'm like, can I can I show up there? I don't know. I don't feel like one of these people. But when I start to like think about it and I'm like, wait a minute. Black communities have been practicing climate solutions forever because we've had to. When you look at it that way, these aren't really innovations. They're just like survival strategies. They are futures in practice led by people who aren't waiting for some governmental solution or Davos or something.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Black Earth. Black Earth is a podcast and community celebrating Mother Earth and the incredible Black women leaders who are restoring our relationship with Mother Earth. I'm Marion, and I'm the creator and host of Black Earth. And in today's episode, we are speaking about the future. We're living through a time of profound change, whether it's extremist politics, extreme inequality, and environmental loss. We are figuring out what it's like to live on a day-to-day with deep uncertainty, but still hold on to the promise and possibilities of a different future. Black people and Black communities have known what it's like to live in a world where the future isn't guaranteed. And yet through it, they've found ways and practices to imagine otherwise. Whether it's music, culture, art, land stewardship, organizing, Black communities know what it's like to create life in impossible conditions. Today, I meet with Tracee Worley, who is the founder of Radical Future Studio. Tracee works with most affected communities and organizations to help them sense and create futures where they can thrive. In our conversation today, we explore what futures practice is and what we can learn from Black futures to create and sense a world where we all can live in freedom and dignity. I love this conversation because it's deep, it's real, and it's honest. As people who care deeply about Earth, we want to live and create a sense of optimism in the work that we do. But we are also living through times of so much change and so much uncertainty that we have to think about the future in radically different ways. I believe that the future is not something to fear, but a place that we create together with ancestral wisdom, with imagination, and with courage. I hope this episode inspires you. Peace. So Tracee, welcome to Black Earth
Thank you.
Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today and being part of this community. We're all about celebrating Mother Nature and championing incredible Black women like you who are helping us through this period of deep transformation towards futures, hopefully,
Mhm.
that lead to liberation and dignity for everyone. I'm incredibly excited for our conversation today for many reasons. I think it feels timely, it feels prophetic, and it also feels deeply relevant, to the things that we are trying to make happen in the world today. Before we begin, the first question that I ask everybody is, how would you describe your relationship with nature?
Ooh, okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me and thank you for the warm welcome. I think I've always been in relationship with nature even before I had language for it when I was growing up. I was raised in Northern California, and I feel like a lot of kids of the 1980s, probably compared to children growing up now, I spent a lot of time just like outside. I did a lot of camping and fishing and swimming and hiking. Um, but yeah, I don't think my family would like call themselves like nature people or connecting with nature, but we were outside constantly when I was growing up. So I feel like I've always had a relationship with the land, and it's been there as a teacher. But again, like if you would have asked me 10 years ago, like, are you an outdoorsy person? I probably would have said no. Like, I just never had that kind of identity. But yeah, over time, especially since the pandemic, I think that that relationship has become more conscious for me. Um, Being in lockdown was a very transformative experience. You know, we couldn't, California was like pretty strict with lockdown in the beginning. Um, so the only activity that I could do really was to just like be outside with my dog, walking on trails. The quiet of doing that and connecting with places that I kind of always knew but never had spent a lot of time. It just changed me. Like I actually think that because of that experience, I'm actually really sensitive to like to place and to the land. I notice now how my body reacts to different places that I'm in. I can feel when something is off about a landscape, or there's certain places that I've been where I feel like, ooh, I feel like the land really holds me here. I live not too far from a mountain called Mount Diablo, which is just a massive mountain in Contra Costa County. And I've always like felt the presence of this mountain. Um, and during the pandemic, I actually moved like quite close where I could see it every day. And yeah, I feel like I have a relationship with this mountain. I feel protected by it. There's something, I don't know, just about the land that feels older than any language that I have to even articulate what this is, but I feel that it speaks to me for sure.
Thank you so much for sharing, Tracee. I want to speak to you about your studio. So, you have a studio called Radical Futures, and I would love to hear more about the journey that led you to start Radical Futures, but also what Radical Futures is.
So I actually really started out my career in education. My current life iteration in design is probably my second career. But that career I started out in human-centered design and innovation. And it taught me a lot. I had a lot of fun, but eventually it started to feel like a cage. The methods were very useful, but ultimately the worldview is still very rooted in capitalism and extraction and whiteness. And I always knew that I wanted to start my own thing. And but of course that's like super scary. You have to face all the fears of like, I'm going to quit my 9 to 5. I'm going to start my own thing. And it took many, many years. It was probably like a 5 year journey to really do it. Um, so I started off by just really freelancing, um, knowing that I was interested in futures and I was interested in design, but I was interested in some different kind of questions that maybe I wasn't getting when I was working, at an agency. Um, and the real shift came for me after I was working on a participatory urban futures project in Tulsa, Oklahoma, on the land where Black Wall Street once stood. And that experience really cracked something open for me, bringing futures and foresight um, to a project like that showed me what's possible when futures are rooted in the land and memory and grief and community. And that was the seed for Radical Futures. So once I completed that project, I realized that, I just didn't want to do design within systems that I no longer believed in. I wanted to design alternative timelines just altogether. So I say that Radical Futures is an experiential future studio. I'm really interested in helping people feel the future before it arrives. So, a big part of my practice is making things, like artifacts from the future, or different scenarios or immersive experiences that bring tangible futures into the room. Experiential futures is not something that I started. It's a methodology that's out there. It uses immersive kind of multi-sensory or sometimes even performative experience to explore futures. Um, so it moves beyond sort of like the traditional futures thinking that you might see that's very strategy heavy, where people are making decks and presentations, to more creating like tangible lived experiences of possible futures. And that allows people to really like engage with and learn from different imagined realities. And yeah, I don't know. I love doing it because I the future can be a super abstract concept. And I think that when you make it experiential, something shifts. It's kind of like I feel like a kid when I'm playing with futures, like playing make believe. It's a bit more accessible, and because it's so tangible, I think it can foster like a deeper understanding of the potential consequences of the actions that we take today.
Mm. And that's, you've raised a really good point about how futures can seem like a very intangible or abstract concept. I know some people listening into our conversation might be wondering, okay, Tracee, Marion, there's only one future. What are you talking about?
Right. Yeah.
What do you understand futures to be, and how does that differ from what we were kind of, I would say, programmed to believe, in the past,
Mm-hmm.
that there is only one future, which is
Yeah.
something that is like linear and ahead of us, that we are
Yes.
walking into without any sort of like control or autonomy or agency to decide differently.
Yeah. And I would say there was a time when I sort of assumed the same thing, that the future was ahead and the past was behind us. And it wasn't until I started, working with futures professionally, that I just started to like question philosophically, like, what is this? And I think I'm still learning quite a bit. I am learning so much every day from the future. And where I'm landing now is I don't think futures are something that we can plan for or control or design in the modern sense. It's not, the future is not just like an empty space where we get to fill our projections with. Um, I deeply do believe that futures are very entangled with the past and the present. And especially if you think about Black history, Black futures, futures also carry like ancestral pain, and possibilities. Um, and I don't think those possibilities belong to us alone. The modern Western idea of the future is often this shiny chrome fantasy of continuity, and this promise that, oh, if we just do the right things, we're going to arrive at a better version of now. um but I really question that, when I hear the kind of futures coming out of Silicon Valley. I don't want that kind of continuity. I don't want to live in that future. So yeah, I think I'm now, futures to me feel more like compost. Maybe it's like a messy relational process. I think good futures should involve decay and death and humility, especially given all that we are facing right now. I think futures require us to let go of control and be more accountable to histories that we can't undo. And I think that if we're willing to engage with the future in that way, maybe something else beyond modernity, beyond capitalism, could emerge. So yeah, like I never try to say like I predict the future. I'm not one of those like futurists. I try to be in right relationship to the future. So more listening than trying to forecast or predict. I think doing futures work has also brought me into awareness of other temporalities, like there are many ways to experience time than the kind of linear time that we human beings experience. And also, this is kind of dark, but to be honest with you, I think for me, I'm starting to recognize that some futures might not include us humans, and that might be okay. I'm sort of learning to live with that too.
I think the conversation about the future right now is so prevalent because there's so much uncertainty in the world. Growing up, for example, in the 90s, there was this optimism in the future, right? There was this sense of like everything is just getting better and better. And the past 10 years, I would say, there's been so much flux in the world and so much change in not just political power, but also just environment. You know, Mother Nature is changing in really intense and powerful ways. And so our sense of like collective certainty about what the future might look like has been basically like thrown up in the air. And I feel this is even more particular when talking about the future of our planet, right? Because we are the data and the science is telling us that the changes coming ahead, you know, unless, I mean, in some elements, it's too late to change, right? But
Mm-hmm.
there's a sense of like what is to come in
Mm-hmm.
some ways can't even be predicted, right? Because some of the data that we have is optimistic estimates as opposed to like actual facts of what will happen, right?
Yeah.
So there's this sense of like, what does the future hold? And I think for many people, that like certainty that we once had about what the future is no longer there, you know? And so I feel that what this futures as a practice, which the way I understand it is, you know, it's an exercise or an activity where you get to explore and interrogate and create different visions of what the future might look like. That feels like a opportunity for people to come together and have real conversations about what matters to them and what they want to put their efforts in, you know, moving
Mm-hmm.
forward, regardless of what happens, like in this collective time future.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that.
And it's one of the things also that drew me to your work because I had a chance to read up on the project that you mentioned earlier on, which was really transformative for you. And that was the Community Futures project that you worked on in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I would love to kind of for you to tell us more about that project and what that looked like in practice. You know, what does a community futures practice look like, you know, and yeah, what did that lead to?
So I was invited into that project by a former client. She was someone that I had worked with on a futures initiative that was focused on Black and Indigenous young men. So we had done some futuring exercises in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Atlanta, Georgia. She's a big believer in radical imagination, and she had just started to do some work in Tulsa and felt like that approach was really needed for the project. The context was this: so after decades of violence and extraction and neglect, 56 acres of publicly owned land in the Greenwood district, that's where the historic Black Wall Street stands, were being transferred back to the community via a community led process. So there was a group of 30 community members who all had ties to Greenwood. Even me, myself, although this was my first time going there, my grandmother actually lived in Greenwood and owned a home there. So they were tasked with shaping a vision for how that 56 acres of land could benefit Black residents for the long term. It was a huge responsibility for that group of people. And the project was really emotionally layered. I was not prepared for this, but it totally made sense once I saw it. People were grieving. like what had been lost through the 1921 massacre. There was urban renewal. There was a lot of broken promises from the city. They were suing the state for reparations for the remaining survivors. I think that summer there were only like 3 or 4 remaining survivors. Um, but people were also holding dreams, that hadn't had really the space to be named either because there was just so much um, conflict between the community and the city. So my role was to help create that space where the dreams could come through. So I brought in, me and my team, a lot of speculative tools. We did some storytelling, a lot of rituals that allowed people to surface the futures they didn't think they were allowed to want, or that, even if I say it, this is never going to happen because like things just kind of always go badly here. Um, and it went beyond like talking about like what kind of buildings will we have or stores. Um, the kind of dreams that were being expressed were like the things that needed to be protected, what needed to be repaired in the community. And the outcome was kind of like a manifesto. And it was, I think the process was really tough. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like there was not trust between the city and the community. Even within the community group, there were some, differences of opinion. But I do think that the futuring process helped kind of usher in a shift in how the community saw its own power, and how, especially for the city, I think there was a very big shift in how they saw that they had to listen differently. Um, so the work is still unfolding. That work that we did in the summer of 2023 has just the evolution now is they have incorporated, they have like an organization that they're standing up that's going to oversee the development of this 56 acres of land. They've got a governance model. They have like all the organizational pieces that they need to like run this thing. And what remains from our time together is that manifesto of what the community wants, what it's dreaming of, what they will protect by any means necessary. And yeah, it was a beautiful process. Like I used to work for an architecture firm, so I have been involved in urban planning projects, and so much of that work can feel very like copy pasted. And what felt so powerful about this is like the community made its own thing that was very bespoke. It had to be bespoke for Tulsa. Um, and one powerful thing that we did is we had a bit of budget to like send members of this community group out to other Black owned like land organizations. So we sent some folks to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Another group went to New Orleans, Louisiana, and another group went to Louisville, Kentucky, because Tulsa doesn't have a long history of like community owned land initiatives. So even the dreaming was tough because it wasn't like we could say, oh, that organization down there, they've got a community land trust. We could see how it's done. So we literally had to like leave the state to go on these field trips to see other Black led organizations that have been doing this for decades. And the beautiful thing about those field trips is every single org, I like cold called them and said, hey, I've been following your work and we've got this group working in Tulsa. And they were just like so honored to receive these folks from Tulsa. They're like, Black Wall Street is the blueprint for what we do today. So absolutely. And it helped them see like what's possible, gather some inspiration, but at the end of the day they still made it very like bespoke to what Tulsa needed. It was beautiful, and honestly I feel like it was a small part of a very big process that is going to go on for years. But I love that kind of work, bringing in the dreaming and the possibility into a process that's extremely painful, that needs to go very slow. Um, yeah, I think that unlike other urban planning processes that I've worked on, this was it wasn't about like getting consensus and just saying, okay, here's the template we're going to use. This group was really carrying a lot of trauma and conflict and also resilience and genius. And my job wasn't to smooth that out with some outside template, but to really honor it and work with it in a way that was honest and slow enough for the work to emerge. So this was like, you hear that moving at the speed of trust. This was literally that. Like this is the kind of futures work that has to move at the speed of trust, not the speed of funding, not the speed of the city. But yeah, I'm really proud of that work, and I mean that was the work that birthed the idea for Radical Futures.
Wow, that's really powerful. There's so much to take away from what you've said, Tracee. I think this idea of like moving at the speed of trust is really important, especially for communities who, for example, in the context of environmental change, are really learning how to trust themselves, trust nature, trust each other. I think the conversation about working with communities who have experienced injustice to create their own futures is something that I've really has really shaped my experience as a Black woman, in
Mm-hmm.
the sense that I've always believed it's possible to create the future that you envision, because I come from a lineage of people that have done that, in spite of the trauma or the setbacks they've experienced in their lives. And I think that's a gift that my Black heritage has given me, this
Mm-hmm.
courage or this belief that regardless of what is happening around you, it is possible to create an alternative than what is being presented.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I want to move that into a conversation about why futures and futures practice really matters for Black led environmental action. And so for me, I see the future of Black led environmental action as a return, right? It's a return to who we are. It's a return to our fundamental connection with Earth. It's a return to, as human beings, returning to being part of nature, as opposed to being separate from nature, which is something that the colonial worldview like upholds, right? Colonialism functions on human beings being separate from nature and superior to nature. I also wanted to kind of hear from you any insights that you have on why futures matters for Black-led environmental action.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be careful here because I don't think that I certainly don't identify as like someone who's in the environmental justice world. But yeah, thinking about like the context of Black people in the United States, like enslaved people always grew food in secret, and grandmothers were composting before that was like the cool thing to do that we should all do. Um, I think that there are deep technologies of care. And when we ignore them and act like climate solutions are like these cool tech solutions, they just don't have a soul. There's no memory. There's no chance of that taking root because who is that for? You can tell me because I'm not necessarily in this world, But I get the sense, especially for urban Black people, that like we don't feel like we belong in these climate conversations or um, when I look at, climate conferences like New York Climate Week, I'm like, can I can I show up there? I don't know. I don't feel like one of these people. But when I start to like think about it and I'm like, wait a minute. Black communities have been practicing climate solutions forever because we've had to. When you look at it that way, these aren't really innovations. They're just like survival strategies. They are futures in practice led by people who aren't waiting for some governmental solution or Davos or something. Um, I've been thinking of that kind of foresight as like embodied foresight. It's an embodied foresight that Black people collectively and others, I think Indigenous people do this as well. It doesn't come from conferences and boardrooms. It comes from the body. Um, it's very intergenerational. Even though like I never learned how to farm from my grandmother, there are things that I have inherited from her about that I know in my body when like things aren't right. That's how we met each other. I was having a very dark moment when we first met each other where I'm like, man, the United States has lost its mind. And that's that kind of like intuition that I think that I inherited from people who had to flee. They fled the South and moved to California. This kind of foresight, it's invisible to the institutional metrics that define what foresight is, but it's everywhere. Like I see it alive in the chants. I got so emotional watching people chanting when they were first gathering to fight back against ICE. And I'm just thinking, how, we have been doing this. We have been singing. Um, yeah, like I think that kind of embodied foresight, it's in the protests on the streets, it's in the gardens, it's in all the back channel planning. Um, there's so much trauma from colonialism that's so continuous that that also there is the care that is continuous too, and the resistance that is continuous. And yeah, I think that if climate futures do not make a space for that, it's not going to work. It's not going to work.
Firstly, thank you for naming that some of these climate spaces and environmental spaces do not feel like inclusive of everybody, and they feel quite niche. And that's something that I think is important to name and to just put it out there. And I believe that everybody's an environmentalist, right? I believe that everybody is an earth keeper because we are earth, right? That's my beginning point. So I can have conversation with anybody about environmental issues because we are collectively part of this amazing community that we call Earth. The spaces that are actively named as environmental spaces or climate spaces should really reflect that in the way
Yeah.
that we connect and speak with other people. So I really appreciate you naming that. But I also want to, the you raised a really important point about that we have technologies of care as a result of the relationships that have survived all the collective trauma, but also in reciprocity, like as a result of living in like harmony with nature. We have these technologies of care that we can remember and return to. And, you know, at least from my experience of living in London, I'm seeing so many more community Black led spaces where people are coming together in community to share knowledge, to grow things together, to walk and commune with nature together. And that for me is futures in practice, and it's a collective foresight. It's people remembering um, together how to be in harmony with nature, learning from each other, right? Like the knowledge isn't in some abstract tech that's yet to be created. The knowledge is in each other, right? And it's in our wisdom. And that I think is a beautiful futures practice from our collective heritage that we can use right now to help us live through these times. It's remembering that the knowledge that we need is gained through relationship with each other and through relationship with the earth and through relationship with our ancestral ways of living and being that have allowed us to be here and to survive and to even have the opportunity to imagine what else can we can envision going forward. Just to also raise that point, one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you about your work is because you are working with communities to help them design and dream of what futures could look like, right?
Hmm.
And that is at the heart of the conversations we're having now in the climate movement, right? That is the
Mm.
root of the climate movement, especially,
Yeah.
in the climate movement, there is this term called the just transition, which came from communities. It came from workers in the energy industry in North America in the 70s and 80s who said, you can't just have a plan to close down this energy factory without our consultation. We also need to be part of designing the future plans that you have in place. And that is what birthed this idea of a just transition, which is now at the heart of the climate conversation. So, the just transition as an idea, the birth of it, the concept of it came from communities who came together and said, we want to have a say in the futures that you are designing for us. We not only want to be like recipients of this, but we have a voice and we know what we want to say. And so I think it's really important to bring that back in these conversations around climate change, around environmental action, where it seems as if the ideas are being decided somewhere else in these policy spaces, in Davos, as you said. They should be rooted in conversations within communities who are supported, you know, and equipped to be able to come together and have conversations about what their futures look like, right? In a way that is right and relevant and appropriate for them. And so that's why I think you matter in this conversation. I think you're a futurist, and I think that's the one big question that we're trying to answer in the environmental movement right now when it comes to climate change.
Hmm.
How do we make sense of this future, right?
Yeah.
How do we
Yeah.
genuinely make sense of this future?
I love that you said that because I mean, to be honest with you, I feel like I look from the sidelines at some of these like climate conversations and conferences, and I'm like, can I, can I get involved? So it's good to know that there are people like you bringing up these kinds of conversations in those rooms because that's the only conversation I'm trying to have. Like, I this is the level with which we need to be talking about climate futures.
Speaking of climate futures, we cannot
Hmm.
talk about the future without speaking about Octavia Butler. I
Yes.
think that would be a crime.
I know, yeah. I first read Parable of the Sower. It's the first book I ever read of hers. She is a science fiction writer. Um, and I read her work way before I ever was interested in design or foresight or futuring. But, Octavia Butler, who is this Black woman from Pasadena, science fiction writer, she got so much right about climate collapse, about water scarcity, gated communities. She even had a character who was running for president in Parable of the Sower that was running on a platform called Make America Great Again. And she wrote that in 1998. Much of Parable of the Sower she was writing and conceptualizing in the 1980s. I mean, and like this is the kind of hit rate that like professional foresight practitioners would kill for. But she had a method. She named it in her notebooks, which are held at a library in Southern California. But she called her method histofuturism.
Mm.
And it was an approach where she said you study historical power patterns of power and survival, and then kind of extrapolate from there. So it's like bringing the history and the present and the future all together. Um, so while many other science fiction writers in her field were writing about these like shiny chrome futures with flying cars and I don't know, robot butlers or robots gone wild, she was actually tracking how our system might collapse and like who would pay the price. Looking at her archives, I'm really seeing like what it takes to have a different kind of point of view, um, and to hold on to it. I think the accuracy of all of those things she predicted, it came from her position, like seeing what she could see as a working class Black woman living in Southern California. And I think that Black women have just been practicing that kind of futures work for generations, like just out of necessity. Like we know how to anticipate harm. We know how to adapt in real time. And I think adaptation is a big part of the novel. And we know how to build continuity through collapse. And that is foresight work. That's the kind of foresight work that I want to practice. So I feel like she's just like a beacon at this time where I am trying to find my foothold in futures and foresight.
I think it points to one of the important reasons why, when you're talking about the future, it's important to have it in conversation with as diverse group of people as possible, right? Because we
Hmm.
all bring different perspective and different lenses into the conversation that allows us to really explore all the different alternatives that are to come, you know? And I know that you are also very passionate, like, about centering like Black women in the conversation about futures as a practice, because mainstream futures practice tends to center, um, I would say, it's primarily seen as kind of like a Western tool or artifact that originated from like the military, who used these tools to be able to like anticipate, potential threats and respond to them. But as you've shown through Octavia Butler and just through our conversation, um, there are people all around the world that have been practicing futures and using that to sense and anticipate and respond to like multiple different pathways ahead of them. Um,
Hmm.
why is it important to you that Black women are centered in this conversation about the futures practice?
Yeah. I mean, I just think we're really good futurists because we've had to be.
Yes.
Like you said, like we've had to sense around corners. We've had to like invent the impossible while surviving the impossible. We've had to like make sure our children and our families survived into the future. Um, I believe it's the same for Indigenous women as well here in the Americas. And yeah, I think if a future space is interested in understanding resilience and adaptability under pressure, start with Black women. Like I want to see Black women who aren't even professionally trained futurists or foresight practitioners be invited into these spaces to be strategists. because they're doing the work. They're practicing futures just without the credit and without the funding. And I wish that more of the mainstream futures space were just creative about being able to like acknowledge that kind of expertise that's not certified in a lab or funded by the MacArthur Foundation or whatever. The industry suffers because it does not include this kind of embodied, collective, intuitive foresight. I mean, I hope that my work that I'm doing now and for the rest of my life is about um, bringing more respect and awareness of that kind of work. I mean, sometimes you need people just even calling attention to say, hey, um, this foresight that you are practicing is not the only kind. But I feel like to survive, we are going to have to get more creative, like for real. We're going to have to include a lot more people. We're going to have to have humility about what counts as the kind of knowledge that can be on stage at TED and in these like important spaces where the future gets articulated. And yeah, I want to see more Black women in these spaces for real.
I want to raise something which I feel nervous talking about. When people think about futures, right, they think about birthing and creating something new and bringing to life something new. But you're also curious about futures and its relationship to like dying and death. And I just wanted to ask you to share more about that because I think your thoughts or your perspective on it might also bring like comfort to people in some ways.
I love this question because death and birth are linked. I think I told you before, I'm a Scorpio, so this kind of thing is just this is what we are made of. And yeah, I think that we are living in a moment that demands the capacity to let things die so that something can be born. We can't just have the birth without the death. Like it's gonna be both. And it's not just like a physical death. So I don't want to get morbid, but it's the death of identities, our attachments to certain things, to institutions, the death of entire ways of being, and also knowing that modernity teaches us to fear death and to fight it as at all costs and to see death as a failure. Even looking at culturally the way that we fear death, we fear aging. We want to extend our youth. We're obsessed with just looking young, and um, even our rituals around death hide the realities of death and dying from us. And I think many Black, Indigenous, and just non-Western traditions understand death is a passage. It's like a teacher. It's a part of the life cycle. You cannot have birth without the death. So I think in that view, to allow something to die with dignity is an act of love. That gives me hope that like what needs to be born actually is not ours to design. It is not ours to go do the research, make the deck, make the presentation, make the TED talk, sell the. It's waiting for us to get out of the way and to just let something die. Like I think that's the work.
Tracee, thank you so much for sharing that. As you were speaking, I literally could see the tension sometimes we have in this movement of it's the fear of giving up and not having that solution, not figuring out and not giving up as in resigning and walking away, but as in accepting that yes, in some places the climate has changed so much. So what does dying with dignity for those communities, for those places look like? I think that conversation we haven't met with full heart yet. But another element of it, as you've just so beautifully said, is about allowing things to emerge. And that requires courage to surrender and to let go.
Yes.
Wow. Thank you. I have two more questions for you. Firstly, what is bringing you joy right now in this season of your life?
Well, I think it's related to what we were just talking about with death. Like this season, I'm in my auntie era. Um, I'll be 45 this year, and I feel just more grounded and more myself than I ever had. I think, um, you know, us women are taught that, oh, middle age is like something to be afraid of. Like, oh, you're gonna be washed, you're gonna be irrelevant. And I'm not finding that to be the case. Like, I am having more fun now than I did in my 20s or 30s. Like, there's just a different kind of joy that comes with not needing to prove anything. Um, I'm not chasing like any titles or climbing any ladders. And I really, since especially starting my own company, have stopped measuring my worth by my productivity. I think that, I'm parenting myself now with care and humor and boundaries. Um, I really trust when something is a yes, and I I trust when something is a no. Um, and yeah, like every day just feels more aligned with whatever it is I'm on earth here to do. And I think there is a lot of magic in that. It's so small though. It's like it's not a big flashy kind of magic. It just lives in the small stuff.
Tracee, how can we support you and your work?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the easiest way is you could follow Radical Futures. I'm most active on LinkedIn, but I'm also on Instagram at Radical Future Studio. You could share the work, and I'd love to be invited into spaces where people want to think about the future. If you are holding a question about your future or your organization's future, reach out. I'd love to help people sit with what they don't yet have language for. So hit me up.
Thank you so much, Tracee. This has been amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate being with you today. And thank you so much for a really provocative conversation.
Thank you so much for joining today's episode of Black Earth Podcast. I hope that you are inspired and moved and changed by the conversation that we had today. This season of Black Earth Podcast is made possible because I have an amazing team around me. So firstly, thank you to our funding partner, Synchronicity Earth. Thank you to our podcast production team at Content is Queen. Thank you to our impact producer, Kaz Watson. And thank you to the amazing visual design artist, Shanice DaCosta. I would love to hear your thoughts on the conversation today because you, my friend, are a very important part of this conversation. You matter and your voice matters. So make sure you're connected with us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok at Black Earth Podcast. And we also have a newsletter called Tender Revolutions, where we share more thoughts, more insights on all things Earth Care, as well as live opportunities from our growing network of supporters and organizations. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, so you can get the latest episode as soon as it goes live. In the meantime, be well, get out in nature, and get right with Mother Nature. Peace.